I'd like to begin by acknowledging the territory that we are all on. This space has been occupied and lived on and celebrated by the Siksika, Piikani, Kainai, Kootenai, Nakota, Tsuut'ina, and is now known as Treaty 7 territory. I'd like to also acknowledge the Royal Society for their invitation and bringing me here. And I want to stop and acknowledge the youth that sit here among us, and I'm so happy that you guys are here. My name is Tasha Hubbard. My father's people are Nehio and Nakota from Treaty 6. My mother's people are Nagawe, Nehio, and Métis from Treaty 4 territory. The Indian Act forces me to have one membership in a community only, and that is Papiksis First Nation. But I acknowledge my responsibility to both the territories that I come from, and I currently live in Treaty 6. I didn't always know that I just shared with you. I was what you could call a giveaway baby, given up at birth by my parents, one who's a direct residential school survivor, the other who is a multi-generational survivor of residential school. My mother's father, mother, and grandparents all went. I grew up in southern Saskatchewan with a third-generation homesteading family, and in a few months, my adopted mom will go and live in the homestead and the home that her grandparents built in 1912. At 15, I started looking for my birth parents, and I found them because they were among the handful of students that Chief Atleo referenced earlier who were going to university in the 1970s. I was able to reconnect with my birth parents at the age of 16 when I was still a youth. And I laugh at the reference to gray hair because mine are starting to come in now. Yeah. I'm saying it's wisdom. I'm hoping that's the case. The Cree word for, the Cree word for youth is oskayak. And it doesn't work. That way you go. And I'm lucky enough to be guided by elders and knowledge keepers who have taught me some important things. And one of the most important was the encouragement that I received to use my voice, which for me ended up being filmmaking, and now filmmaking leading to the academy. As a youth, I was too shy to be in front of the camera. But definitely felt more comfortable being behind the camera and finding my voice in that way. One of my teachers is Narcissus Blood from the Kainai Nation in southern Alberta. We met because we both love buffalo, and we can sit and talk all day, and occasionally we get the opportunity to do that, about the way our relationship to buffalo has transpired and continues into today, and the way that our histories as Plains Indigenous peoples have intertwined with buffalo. I asked him the other day what the Blackfoot word for youth was, and he told me, atsitatbe. I don't have a Nakota teacher, so I would have included that word too, and I just met someone who taught me how to say youth in Dene, and it's sidonaka. Am I close? Close, okay. I'm going to take that. I wanted to use these words, otskayak, atsitapi, tsidonaka, because sometimes I have an issue with the word Aboriginal, as others do. Because sometimes that word can be used to make it seem like we were all the same, and this Chief Atleo mentioned that as well. And it can erase the beautiful differences that we all carry with us as Indigenous people. And I realize that when an announcement goes out, or when books are published, or when conferences are organized, that it's necessary to use words like Aboriginal or Indigenous. But I want to remind us all that whatever territory you come from, those of us who are visitors to this territory, those of us who are from here, that the Indigenous youth that come from those territories have their own histories, their own stories, and their own beautiful characteristics. And as most of us know, they are the ones who are inheriting a history of trauma from colonization, including hunger and oppression and genocide. I have no fear and no issue with using the word genocide, unlike some who now inhabit what is known as Canada. This is a legacy that has been willfully obscured, forgotten, and erased by the education system of the past and present, by those who benefit from the loss of land and loss of life sustained by Indigenous peoples. However, these Oskaya, Katsitapi, these youth, they've also inherited a strength of will from those who have gone before. In the lands covered by the number treaties, the leaders and elders and women made provisions for the young ones in the form of education. Another teacher of mine has been Elder Danny Musqua, who is Nagawe or Soto from Treaty 4 territory, from the Kisakus First Nation. In order to reconnect with my father as a young person, I traveled with him, and one of the things we talked about was the treaties, and I was fortunate to have an understanding at the beginning of my journey, in the beginning of my learning journey, as to who I am as a Nehio woman, to have that. And through him, I met Danny Musqua. He tells the story of the Treaty 4, that the grandfathers and the grandmothers and the leaders and the women who came together to negotiate the treaty understood absolutely that they were there to prepare for the youth that are coming. And one of the things that they acknowledged and understood as having power was the power of the pen. They understood that in order for youth that were to come, what they would need to succeed, that they would need to know how the pen could work, how education would sustain them. This got subverted through the imposition of residential school, in the sense that what happens is, rather than the power of the pen being held alongside the right for Indigenous peoples to educate their youth as they had for generations upon generations, the power of the pen got subverted by residential schools that were understood to be the only system of education, and were understood to be a tool to erase those Indigenous systems of education that fortunately still exist. One of the things that gets said a lot in my territory is that education is our buffalo. And that it is true in some ways, in the sense that, I look at those of us sitting here, and we've chosen that path. We've chosen the path of education, of post-secondary education, of our careers being in education institutions where we teach others. The thing is, for Indigenous people, what can maybe be implied with this is that the education only means the provincial education systems. It only means colleges and the technical institutes and universities. And all of those have been instrumental in continuing a Western perspective, which oftentimes includes inaccurate history. And it's a reflection of the willful forgetting of Canadian nation building. There are also practical concerns when we think about Western education and the access for Indigenous youth. Practical concerns like funding. And a study commissioned by the Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations showed that First Nation education receives 40 to 50% less than in instruction for provincial schools. There's also the aspect of the fallacy that every single Aboriginal person in Canada receives free education, and we hear that perpetuated with interest groups and sometimes in the media. Now, there is funding out there. If you are a member of a First Nation, absolutely, most get money for post-secondary education. But the need for that funding far exceeds the amounts available. There are many funding shortfalls that happen, and the waiting lists are very long. In 1990, when I started my undergrad journey at the University of Saskatchewan, I got $675 to live on, and I was able to do that. I was able to live on that money and go to school and focus and not have to work outside of school, take my classes. 15 years later, in 2005, it was my second year of my master's degree, also at the University of Saskatchewan. At this time, I got $875. So in 15 years, I got an extra $200. Absolutely, that wasn't enough to live on and focus on for my studies. So that's just one tiny example of the funding shortfalls. There are many more, and they're very complex, and I don't want to go into them here. There are other issues in terms of Indigenous access to education, and I invite you to seek these issues out and see how you can support some of the initiatives that are happening in your territories. However, the government is not alone in its responsibility in terms of funding and access. Universities and other education institutions also need to be held accountable for the way in which education for Indigenous youth is conceived and delivered. The lens that is so often directed towards Indigenous youth is ability to succeed or fail needs to be redirected back at education institutions. Institutions need to reconsider what is being taught and how. It needs to reconsider the roles of teacher and learner. And I think that in so many ways, our institutions and those who teach and those who are in positions of power need to realize that they need to be learners in these new histories that aren't new to us as Indigenous people, but that are unfortunately new to many Canadians. They need to ask questions such as, in what ways are Indigenous knowledges incorporated? In what ways are Indigenous territories acknowledged? And in what ways are Indigenous students included and respected? I would also like to add that the buffalo is our education. And what do I mean by this? The treaty process was never the treaty process of the power of the pen was never meant to replace our own systems. We continue, as we did the day before treaty, as we did 100 years before treaty, as we did 600 years before treaty, that we as Indigenous peoples have the right and responsibility to educate our youth from our own ways, within an Indigenous framework, based on our natural laws and our ways of understanding the world. This needs to continue within spaces of higher learning, such as universities and within schools. That's not easy. That's not easy to do. I'm showing you a photo here of a fragment of a buffalo glyph stone that's known as Mastosini, which in Cree loosely translates to big stone. But it has a much bigger meaning for us in Cree territory. Mastosini, up until 1966, was a much larger stone in the shape of a buffalo. It was a sacred site, a site of ceremony, a site where we remembered as Nahio people who we are. People made pilgrimages there. People prayed there. In 1966, it was dynamited to make way for the Gardner Dam. And what you see here is a fragment that's left. My family hold smaller pieces within our family. There are a few small pieces in museums. I'm sure there are many other pieces that are under the water. These are the stories that we need to uncover. The story behind Mastosini is of kinship, as the story behind Mastosini is the buffalo understanding and wanting and holding a responsibility to sustain us as Nahio people, just as we as Nahio people have a responsibility to the land and to those who share the land with us. These are the stories that need to be uncovered and included within all of our education institutions. This next still is from a film that I made called Buffalo Calling. And it reminds me of a period of time in our history where colonization came close to succeeding in its goal of erasing both us as Indigenous people and the buffalo from the land. These buffalo are in Montana. They are buffalo that were killed in the late 1880s, early 1990s. They were killed by a conservationist named William Hornaday, who decided that the buffalo were going to be erased, the buffalo were going to disappear, and that he needed specimens to have of their existence. So at a time when the buffalo population was anywhere from 300 to 500 total, down from 40 to 60 million, whichever number you accept, he went out and shot 29 buffalo in order to get these, as he understood them to be, the perfect specimens. They were in the Smithsonian Museum till 1957. They were then dispersed across the United States. A small agricultural museum found them and put them back together again, and there's footage in my film of that display. We both experienced genocide, us as Indigenous peoples and the buffalo. We both succeeded in evading the erasure of our presence here in these lands. But colonization has not stopped. It has changed and morphed and is sometimes even unrecognizable. But we are still here, and there are more of us all the time. We sit here today in the shadow of Sleeping Buffalo Mountain, also known as Tunnel Mountain. We have young ones in our midst, and these truly diverse and gifted young ones have not always been heard. And a Canada who wishes to include them must first learn how to listen. Aboriginal youth engagement cannot be a uniform and homogenized strategy that is applied to youth. It needs to come from the youth themselves, who are able to tell us what they see as issues that are important to them. In my own practice as a filmmaker and as an educator, I take that to heart, as I have had people in my past who have supported me and encouraged me in my voice. I try and do the same. I take that as a responsibility. We have rights, but we don't have rights without responsibilities. This is Mitchell Palmaker's piece. This is an initial sketch he did for a film that we worked on together. He was given the opportunity to find his voice through a theater project. And one of the things when I talk to youth in their home communities, they speak about the opportunities that are available for them to develop. And one of the things that they say is, they want to have things, sports are sometimes available, but they want to have other aspects to express themselves. I just also wanted to mention that Shannon Kustachin, who was from Attawapiskat, is also now going to be the inspiration for a DC comic she's going to be a hero in the comic series. So what do youth imagine for themselves? How can we create spaces of imagination for them, for a future that moves towards a country that acknowledges them, respects them, and celebrates them? This is my son visiting a buffalo glyph stone, another sacred site, who reminds us who we are. My cousin Colby Tatusis has said, young people always don't need direction. They already have that hidden in the depths of their passion. There just needs to be space held for them to inquire about it, a facilitation of freedom from the traumatic realities stemming from genocide, an evoking of the emotional blocks, preventing passion from being fully expressed. It's a process of desystemization and undoing the psychological conditioning of oppression. And it's our responsibility as adults to help clear that space for them. I talked to a few of the youth prior to coming here, and I'd like to just provide what's left of my time. If there's any youth that would like to share initial thoughts, I'm hoping that they're able to participate in the question and answer and in discussions that we have throughout the day. And I invite those of you sitting here to approach them, to introduce yourself to them, to move past that invisible divide between teacher and learner, between elder and youth. So is there any of the youth here that would like to say something? I hear whispering. I hear thinking. Okay. I think what we need to be reminded of is that it takes a lot to come up here. Even me, who I've done lots of talks, I've been asked to speak in many different spaces. My filmmaking was what pushed me to understand that I had a voice and I had things to share. And it was what pushed me into thinking that I could follow academia as a pursuit. I never saw myself as a teacher before. I never saw myself being in a place where I could stand up in front of people and share what I've learned and share what I think. Finding my voice through filmmaking gave me that. The people who moved over to create space for me created that for me. People who came and asked me, what do you think? And really genuinely cared to know, cleared that space for me. And so I challenge all of us in the room, those of us who are used to standing up at this podium, who are used to sitting in panels, who are used to standing up in front of a classroom, to start asking those questions, to start putting ourselves in the position of being learners. Our youth have a lot to say. Indigenous people have a lot to say. And I'm really thankful for to the Academy for giving space. I'm just going to say, I wish, as Chief Atleo said, I wish that had begun at the beginning of the Royal Academies, the Royal Society's beginnings in 1888, because we sure could have used a forum to share some of the things that we were going through at that time and the oppression that we were finding ourselves under with the Indian Act. But better late than never, and it's really great to be here. And I look forward to having conversations with as many of you as possible. Thank you.